On today's program, we feature a discourse with prominent Caribbean personality, the Honorable Rex Nettelford. So don't go anywhere. Carib Nation is up next.
In celebration of its 15th anniversary, the Cultural Academy for Excellence, a nonprofit arts and education program, will host a benefit concert on Saturday, June 11th at 4 p.m. at the Clarice Smith Performing Arts Center on the University of Maryland's College Park campus. The family-friendly concert will feature the jazz, hip-hop, and Caribbean sounds of guest artists A.T.N. Charles, Jacques Schwartz-Bart, Chris Styles-Bacon, and Orlando Cotto, along with the award-winning Positive Vibrations Youth Steel Orchestra. Tickets online at claricesmithcenter.umd.edu. For additional information, go to www.cafeyouth.org.
Welcome to Carib Nation. I'm David Hines. We've been trying for quite some time to catch up with Rex Nettelford. Well, we finally got him, and he's here in the studio with us today. Honorable Rex Nettelford, welcome to Carib Nation.
My pleasure.
It's true, we've been trying now for about 3 or 4 years to get you into the studio to talk. Let's go straight to the heart of the matter. I just got back from the Caribbean. We were down there in Jamaica, and I was in St. Lucia. And every time I talk to people who have something to say or do with policy and ideas in the Caribbean, I seem to get the sense that the Caribbean is in trouble, the Caribbean is in crisis. Do you share that view?
Yes, of course. We always were in trouble. We always were in crisis and have to be. We are engaged in something very important. And that is, apart from building nations, we are trying to shape a new society. A society which will indeed fulfill many of the things promised to us, first by emancipation over 160 years ago, and by independence, starting with Jamaica and Trinidad in 1962. This is long distance running. It isn't sprinting. And I think people have to remember that. Maybe it speaks to a little bit of our arrogance to believe that we haven't got to walk the path that so many other societies have had to throughout history. And it's going to take a little bit of time for us to really get on the even keel to get where we want to go. So that's what you're seeing. You will have noticed as well that in the middle of all the contrariness, in the middle of all the chaos, there's tremendous energy, and particularly in places like Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, and of course Barbados itself has always been seen as sort of Little England with a sort of underlying stability. But that in itself too, that is getting very dynamic, and it is succeeding in many ways. So I like to tell people, particularly visitors, let not your heart be troubled. Neither let it be afraid. We'll get there.
The path that we have walked, let's talk about the path over the last 40 years or so since independence in 1962. Has it been a satisfactory walk?
Nothing is satisfactory. We have failed in a number of things, and we have succeeded in a number of things. And it makes sense. The fact that I'm here alive to tell the tale is itself an indication that we are still in the struggle. And I regard it as a struggle. Now, we have to remember that we are a people who have come out of 4 centuries of slavery, indentureship, colonialism, and we have to find our own path. The most of the history of the Caribbean let us not forget, most of the history has been in bondage. And to expect in 38 years to change something which has gone on, all the obscenities of 4 centuries, is asking a little much. This is not an excuse. I am merely stating a fact and a reality which people like myself are too well aware of and are definitely having ourselves poised to address the issues which relate to this particular situation.
As we look at the independence experience, one cannot help but note that there has been in the political arena a lot of contradictions, a lot of excesses, and so forth. Are we wriggling ourselves out of that initial period of political confusion?
Well, yes, to a large extent, but let me hasten to say, at least we have not had, if you regard independence as a bit of a revolution, and indeed it was, albeit a quiet one, and I want to state, particularly since I'm speaking in the United States and in the capital of the United States, that we did not get that independence through the barrel of a gun. There was no Bunker Hill or what have we. We got it by negotiation. And that is a very important difference and indicates the capacity of Caribbean people to compromise and to come to decisions by negotiation. And it's interesting, in the 70s, there were lots of the young Turks who felt that, who were impatient with the pace of development because they said that probably we hadn't had the bloodletting that the United States had, nor that Haiti had, nor that Russia had, or that France had. We haven't yet cut off the head of a president, as the English did, or king. You know, so I think we need to get things into perspective. And the truth of the matter is, we are trying to make the best of a situation which, incidentally, isn't always in our favor. You take this recent thing, globalization, which everybody's talking about, which I've described as a new designation for an old obscenity. It really is, quite frankly, the way of the North Atlantic realigning itself to maintain its hegemony over the rest of the world. And we in the developing world, as soon as we make a headway, it's the old Sisyphean existence. We roll the stone up the hill, and you know, the next thing we know, a force pulls us back three paces or niches. And this is very difficult. And we have to now situate ourselves in a new international order. People here should understand this. Interestingly enough, a number of people in the so-called first world are themselves understanding it, particularly the young, hence the battle in Seattle. And when the World Bank and the IMF met recently, the demonstrations here in Washington itself against the clear inequities which come out of the arrangements of the WTO in trading to really keep people like us still on the margin. And this we have to fight, while at the same time making our individual communities in the Caribbean a place where all those who tenant it can call home. Where they can have a sense of place and purpose, and where their sense of personhood and their freedom and their sense of justice are realized. Now we fight a lot, we talk a lot about the whole thing of social justice not being there, and indeed we do this. At least we can talk about it and not have somebody knocking on our doors. I'm speaking of the English-speaking Caribbean, the old West Indies, somebody knocking on our door at 3 o'clock in the morning to take us to some concentration camp. We can, as they say in Jamaica, me mouta fi me. You know, we feel very strongly about this. The talk show, that is something else. I mean, you know, it's fantastic throughout the region. Got a perk in Barbados, and several of them in Jamaica. And they can tell the politicians where to get off and whatever without fear of reprisal. So that's something which we treasure. And the judiciary, I'm here in the World Bank meetings, the Caribbean Group for Economic Development, but the sort of things we are concentrating on are governance, capacity building for the justice sector. These are things which, of course, we try to quantify them. They are unquantifiable, but these are things which people feel very strongly about. And we want to tenant a society which is humane, which is civilized. We are very much into the notion of civil society, but these are things we have to work towards.
In a lot of your writings, you have celebrated the working people, the working class, the ordinary toilers in the Caribbean, and the role that they have played in our history, the role they continue to play, and the role that they must play as the Caribbean marches on. Yet, today there seems to be a kind of downplaying of the capacities of the ordinary working people in the Caribbean.
Yes, on that you are very right, and yet one could say what is very wrong. You and I are from the Cane Piece. Most of us are from the Cane Piece. Lots of us like to forget it, but you know, some of us have come out a little earlier than others. And part of the problem is that the educational system in the past, though it certainly has prepared us to cope with the rest of the world in many respects, in many instances, it has not prepared us to cope with ourselves. And so many of us who indeed have come from the Cane Piece have forgotten about that Cane Piece. But those of us who can claim some wisdom and some insight into as complex a society as the Caribbean are the legatees. We are people who are the beneficiaries of the wisdom of that very Cane Piece. And the people from below, as George Lamming describes them, continue to be the source of energy for much that makes sense in the Caribbean. And at strategic points, you will find that those are the people who, in fact, are being looked at now. And we are taking this seriously. Back to the World Bank meeting on questions of governance and whatever. We are talking about partnerships, government and the community, the private sector, so-called, and the community. The community has to be brought into the center of the cosmos, as it were. And we have a lot to learn from those ordinary people, the vast majority of people who have migrated from the English-speaking Caribbean to have all come from the Cane Piece. You know, these are, and they, many of them have acquitted themselves admirably, using their wits, of course, and their wit and their wits and hard work. What I would like to see more of is the application of that hard work and that energy, more of that back home. Truth is that the society is limited, restricted. There are more opportunities now than when I was a boy, but even so, still limited. And the level of dissatisfaction and disillusionment is itself a function of the progress we have made. You know, you introduced me as the Vice Chancellor of the university. Well, really, when I was a youngster, nobody could come to my school and tell me that one day you may be the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West. That just was not in your mind. Or you could be the Governor General or the Governor or the Prime Minister or what have you. Things have changed. And we tend to indulge this blasé sophistication and say nothing has changed. A great deal has changed. What has not happened is that the infrastructural imperatives have not kept up with the progress that has been made otherwise. And people are far more sensible, far more informed about the world, about society, about the potential, their own creative potential, and therefore become very impatient with all obstacles which are in their way. And that is what, and that tension which exists throughout the region, we have to make sure that it remains a creative tension rather than a disintegrative one. And we are in danger of its becoming disintegrative. And this is a tremendous challenge for political leaders, not only political leaders, but leaders of all kind, wherever they are placed in the society.
As we talk about the energy in the Caribbean, the creativity in the Caribbean, is there something that we can call and feel and touch as a Caribbean culture?
Oh Lord, undoubtedly, undoubtedly. We have more artists per square inch than is probably good for us. And people, there's a good reason for it, I feel, because if you have lived in a situation where you're subjugated, you retreat into areas which are beyond the reach of the oppressor. And those areas have to do with the exercise of the creative imagination and the creative intellect. And both together is really what makes the mind. And that's what we have depended on. Therefore, there's so much that has been built in the Caribbean in terms of innate structures. We'd not have built pyramids or leaning towers of Pisa or what have we, but the structures are in our heads. And this is why education continues to be so important in grappling with the new challenges. Technology, for example, one of the things that we have to be on the cutting edge of is what the entire third millennium will face and is already facing, and that is the harmonization of technological thought and spiritual feeling.
You are in charge of one of our shining examples of Caribbean integration, notwithstanding some of the obstacles that that institution has had to come up against. Are you satisfied that the mandate that was set for the UWI 40, 50 years ago, that you were on top of it?
No, we have gone beyond that now.
Okay.
And we have set ourselves new mission statement, new what have we, and so on. And I'm not satisfied that we are getting there fast enough. But, oh yes, the university was set up 50 years ago for 600 people. We have the 22,000 now attend over the 3 campuses, and you can add to that another 30,000 who are pursuing courses by distance, informal education through the old extramural department, now called the School of Continuing Studies. So in a very real sense, we have far outstripped what that was, but happily, thanks to that, it remains arguably the greatest gift that we have given to ourselves. We have had 50 or so thousand graduates from the university are all over the world, and people of world class and people who have achieved a great deal, but including a number of prime ministers who incidentally will not take responsibility for their acts of omission. But the thing is that we have a great job to do in terms of preparing the next generation to, in fact, situate themselves for the new challenges in the third millennium. Therefore, all of that has serious implications for our curriculum, for the way we deliver knowledge, for the generation of new and appropriate knowledge that can be plowed back into everyday living and help to inform public policy. So these things are now exercising our minds. And we have to make strategic alliances with similar institutions all over the world, because we are in the world. We have always been conscious of that anyway. And the thing is, we have changed our own concept of ourselves. We no longer think of ourselves as an elitist joint, precariously perched at the apex of some stolid pyramid. No, we're more of a hub in a network of tertiary institutions, and we have taken some positive steps in that regard. There is the Association of Caribbean Tertiary Institutions, which take in community colleges, teachers' colleges, and what have we. And through the mechanisms of articulation and accreditation, there are links with the University of the West Indies. So we are all over and everywhere, and the whole idea is to help develop an articulated system of education that will produce for the region skills which are constructive, creative, integrated, rounded, that kind of thing.
As I travel through the Caribbean and I observe the University of the West Indies, I get the sense that what we have instead of a regional university is three separate national universities in Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica. Talk a little bit about
No, well, inevitably that was going to be so. But again, you know, the Caribbean is a very interesting place. If you have a solution, find a problem. And in order to be unified, we had to be diverse. We had to decentralize for obvious reasons that we can get the commitment. No, it's one university. But in fact, we are a people of diversity. We are heterogeneous. Even among blacks in the Caribbean, you have different kinds of blacks. You have quality blacks, non-quality blacks, mid-quality blacks, and so on. And we are people of different ethnic things, different mixtures, and so on. And remember now that the Caribbean remains arguably the most vital living laboratory of much of what is the history of the Americas, where people of different cultures had their encounters of different kinds over a long period of time. And so people are accustomed to being other things as well as themselves. And I like to put it in this context because you and I, all of us could be described in a particular way, despite the way we look, that we are part African, part European, part Asian, part Native American, but totally Caribbean. Lots of people can't deal with that kind of chaos in order, or order in chaos. But we can. We operate on 3-4 levels at the same time. And that's the nature of the region and should be the nature of the Americas. The notion that a place like this country, for example, has decided to go one linear route in terms of its identity. And the tendency is the homogeneity, that principle is fighting dead on with the reality of heterogeneity. And, the people in power expect blacks to be white. Let me put it that way in blunt terms, while the whites don't expect themselves to be black.
Yes, yes.
And I've often said to my North American white friends that until you get around to the notion that you're as negrified as I am Europeanized, I'm speaking to you in English, I'm not speaking to you in Yoruba or in Swahili or in whatever other language, or in Twi. Until they can come to terms with the notion that they're as negrified as people like us are Europeanized, there will be no peace in the land, really. And I think in the Caribbean, I've often put it another way, thanks to M.G. Smith and his great work on cultural pluralism, that in the Caribbean, we have come to understand what it is to live together rather than side by side. You see, multiculturalism is a nice sort of way out because you can be in your small corner and I in mine. We're still multi. In the Caribbean, it's not that. It's an interculturalism. And the intercontextuality of existence was forced upon us by the reality of colonialism and slavery, but we are constantly creolizing everything. And all peoples of the Americas are Creoles, all of us, including the Native Americans, who, as a result of their exposure to others of us who came in later, have themselves changed.
You mentioned cultural pluralism, and Guyana, and to a less extent Trinidad, are going through a period of serious self-examinations and difficulty. Talk a little bit about that and its significance and what the future holds in your view.
Well, you see, in fairness, I mean, what we have inherited is, the Indians really are late in the game of exactly what the blacks had to fight against, their marginalization. And remember, the Indians were brought in after emancipation, and they took the place of the Africans in that kind of society which is so stratified. Everybody wants to look down on somebody else. Well, time has caught up with us in that part of the Caribbean, because in majoritarian rule, so-called democratic elections and whatever, the majority count. And the Indians are, in Trinidad, a major minority, and in Guyana, an undoubted majority. So the question of power, because this is very important, power having been transferred to these outposts, the question as to who should control that power, how it should be distributed, is a factor of post-independence. And this is what you are seeing. Now they will have to work things out. And again, we are trying, but there's enough in terms of this creolization thing. For example, the Indian, no more than the person of African ancestry can, he must be a Creole. It must be a way. The Indian has to become West Indian in the way that the African became West Indian and the European became West Indian. And it will take time as well. When people have flexed their muscles enough, do enough shadow boxing, get a little tired, nobody quite wins, it will work itself. But this is all part and parcel of the thing of growing up, shaping a new society. And we're going to have a whooping cough and our chicken pox and what have you, all of that. You know, as long as the immune system doesn't become totally shattered, I think we will work through. Optimistic, yes. I have to be optimistic because we are all we have. And you know that old injunction of Marcus Garvey, who in 1937 said it to West Indians he met in Menelik Hall in Nova Scotia. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Only you yourselves can do it. The interesting thing that Bob Marley, who's now credited with it, of course Bob Marley read Marcus Garvey, and he transformed that into a powerful couplet. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And you see, it is we who have to do it, and that's what we are doing. And I think we should be given some space in which to do it. I go back to what I said, that as soon as people in Washington hear that a couple of guns are fired in West Kingston, a travel advisory comes out advising their citizens not to go, which of course had tremendous impact on our tourist industry. The truth of the matter is that this place is a gun place, and it won its independence by the gun, which we didn't, you know. And I think things need to be put into perspective. And, you know, it is true that, of course, the media are largely responsible for much of this. As a youngster, I was very courageous. You would see me on the subway in New York, anytime, going to Long Island to Brooklyn. Well, nowadays you will never find me on that. So people are affected by this, I understand. I prefer to stay in Manhattan. And you know, Washington itself, I'm reliably informed, is not by any means a non-violent spot. And some people escape it and get off to Virginia and Maryland, not knowing what is going on back in the heart of the city. So in fact, we need to get all these things into perspective.
Professor Nettleford, I want to thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you very much.
Like I said at the beginning of the program, we've been trying to catch hold of you for a very long time, and we finally got you today, and we're very glad.
Well, I've been finally hijacked. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been my pleasure to speak to Professor Nettelford. It's a lifelong dream, I dare say, and I'm very glad that I've been able to share it with you. So until the next time, this is David Hines, thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of Carib Nation. And remember, as always, our motto here is one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation. And as we say, rally round the West Indies.